Imagine this: the White House, tension in the air, a really high stakes diplomatic meeting about to kick off. Today, we're doing a deep dive into President Trump's third White House meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's set for Monday, July 7th, 2025. Our mission
Mhm.
really is to unpack what they're aiming for, who the key people are, and, the bigger impact this could all have. We're drawing on confirmed reports here: Reuters, AP, Times of Israel, getting you the story right from the sources. Okay, so let's start with what seems, well, most urgent right now. That's the big push for a Gaza ceasefire, and maybe even more critically, getting those remaining hostages held by Hamas released. This isn't just, a bullet point on an agenda. It feels like the real humanitarian core driving things.
Right, absolutely. And what's really interesting is how that immediate Gaza focus isn't happening in a vacuum. It connects directly to a much, much broader regional strategy. Sources are saying the talks will go way beyond Gaza. They'll be covering Iran, Syria too. And think about Trump recently lifting some sanctions, right? That was aimed at encouraging normalization with Israel. If you connect the dots, it points towards what the sources are calling regional realignment. It's not just expanding the Abrahamic framework. It could be about building a wider anti-Iran coalition,
Yeah.
potentially pulling in countries like Syria, maybe even Lebanon, using new economic carrots and security assurances. I mean, that would fundamentally redraw the power map in the Levant, something we haven't really seen in decades.
Wow, yeah, that's a huge geopolitical shift potentially unfolding there. But okay, beyond those sort of grand strategic moves, let's bring it back down to earth a bit. The economics.
Yeah.
What's actually on the table economically? And what's the immediate pressure point there?
Well, there's a pretty significant financial piece to this. Netanyahu's expected to really push on a potential U.S.-Israel trade deal, but the really pressing issue, based on our sources, is the U.S. tariff plans. There's a scheduled jump back to much higher rates set for July 9th. That's literally just 2 days after this meeting wraps up. So, it's not just abstract economic policy. It's a real ticking clock. It could hit specific industries, impact prices for consumers, and it definitely creates some unique leverage in that room.
A ticking clock, right. And while all that economic negotiation is happening, the U.S. military support, that seems pretty constant, doesn't it? We just saw that big $510 million arms sale to Israel confirmed, included things like JDAM kits. For those of us watching closely, what's the significance of those kits in particular? Why mention those?
Yeah, it's not just another number. The JDAM kits, those are basically guidance systems that turn regular bombs into very precise smart bombs, all-weather capability.
Right.
Including those really underscores a deep U.S. commitment to, well, keeping Israel's strategic strike capability sharp. It sends a clear signal across the region about continued U.S. backing for Israel's military edge.
Okay, now here's where it gets maybe a bit more complex, potentially controversial even. Our sources point to some interesting domestic and legal flashpoints around this visit. President Trump has publicly defended Netanyahu over his corruption trial, actually called it a witch hunt. I mean, what does a statement like that from a U.S. president actually do, both for Netanyahu back home and for how the U.S. view on, judicial matters in allied countries is seen? And there's also this hint, this suggestion of U.S. leverage being tied to aid.
Ah, this is exactly where domestic politics and international diplomacy get really tangled up.
Yeah.
Look, it's not about endorsing any viewpoint here, but you have to understand that kind of public defense, well, it can signal a more transactional approach to U.S. aid, where support might seem implicitly linked to whether a country's internal politics align with the current U.S. administration's preferences. It certainly raises questions, sets a bit of a precedent, and adds another layer of pressure for both leaders. And remember who will be in that room navigating all this. You've got top U.S. officials, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, plus Israel's Ron Dermer, who's actually already in D.C. laying the groundwork for these talks. They'll be managing all these tricky dynamics.
So quite a complex picture we've painted here. We've walked through the urgent Gaza ceasefire push, the bigger regional strategies involving Iran and Syria, the economic deadlines with tariffs, the ongoing military support, and then layered on top these really unique domestic political factors for both Trump and Netanyahu. It's a lot.
It really is. And maybe as you think about everything we've just discussed, here's a final thought to consider. With all these threads, diplomatic, economic, military, even legal, so tightly woven together, how will the outcome of this specific meeting on July 7th actually reshape the Middle East? And maybe more importantly, what kind of ripple effects could we see playing out globally in the months, even years ahead? Something to watch.